Hi, my name's Marlowe Katoney, and I'm a Navajo weaver. One of the things whenever you speak to a Navajo weaver, especially the ones who do everything from processing the wool to warping and everything from that point on, you will always get the answer, or you'll always have them tell you that the weaving itself isn't the hard part. The hard part is processing the wool. And you know what? I always find this very curious too with some of these older rugs, where they start the rug and where they end the rug. How weavers do it now is they'll weave a 2x2, so where a warp string comes and that loops around down at the bottom. Now weavers they'll use their battens, and they'll go every two so that the warp strings are completely covered at the bottom. But with some of the early rugs, you don't see that. I don't want to say they didn't have the knowledge to do that. I mean, I'm sure some of them had done that back then, but some of the early rugs, you don't have that here or here. How is weaving passed down through the families? Weavings are usually passed from one generation to the next. For example, before boarding schools, my grandmother learned from her mom, my great-grandmother learned from her mom, and so on and so forth. That's how those terms like generational weavers was coined within Navajo weaving. When you have two colors that meet on the rug, there's a variation of the types of joints that you use. Sometimes it's stack joints, sometimes it's hook joints. And it's just a matter of preference, and that's what they would pass on to the next generation of their weavers. See, because this brown is way different from that brown. This looks like more from a natural fleece, the fleece of the sheep.
Okay. Is this churro?
My guess is it probably is. Some of the questions I do ask myself is, was it the size of the yarn and colors available that determine what that they were going to produce, or did they just try to produce it? Were they producing the rugs as something like, for example, like birds and like a horned toad? If that was something that they just admired, does it have something to do with folklore? Or did they see these things and they wanted to just see if they could be depicted on the rug? So those are some of the questions you kind of ask yourself. But something like a horned toad, in reference to religion, because you're told from very young that the horned toad is your grandparents or an elder. Yeah. My grandmother wove Granado reds, which is very color specific: maroon, gray, black, white. And so they want to keep that tradition alive within their families. For me, I don't necessarily abide by those rules. When I weave, I respond to color. So I purchase all my yarn from R.B. Burnham Trading Company. So when I do go into look through skeins of yarn, I start picking up the yarns that I respond to, and somewhere in the back of my mind, the color scheme starts to come together for me. I've always had some sort of background with art, but it wasn't until I was in my early teens that I started to paint as something that I would do on a regular basis. So after I finished my homework or I came home from school, I would paint. But being a painter, I've always been drawn to color. This cross symbol, I mean, I call it stars, but I really like that glamorized idea of depicting a cross or a star, like where it was just something that's glittering, but I wanted to keep that pizzazz within the entire piece. And then I have also included an eye dazzler, which is this serrated pattern over the top, just to give it that vibrance. I would have to say my influences for Navajo weaving would come from a variety of things. I love music. I like to look into music, and it may not be apparent when you first look at it, but if you see some of the designs, how the composition comes together, you can kind of feel the rhythm that I try to create within my pieces. You know, when I was living down here in Tucson, I had one of my friends, Ricky, we used to go to after hours parties after the bars closed down, and they used to have break dancing and whatnot there, so I guess you could say this is him. Creating the artwork itself is 10%, maybe even 5% of art. The other 95%, the other 90% is how well you speak about your art. That's what makes it valuable to your customer, to collectors, to museums. I believe now that we're in another transitional period where weavers are beginning to experiment more, like myself, and you're going to see a lot of that evolving how we approach Navajo weaving from here on out, I think.